Good evening. My name is Jason Wallace. I'm the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church, and we welcome you to another installment of the Ancient Paths. This past weekend, there was a stir over the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. Among the celebration there was a huge homage paid to the national health system in Great Britain, where basically lots of kids and people dressed up in nurses' uniforms were all dancing around, celebrating what a wonderful socialized medical system they have. In addition to that, they also showed various clips that included a lesbian kiss and a supposedly 11-year-old boy cross-dressing. And people have been outraged over this. Some of the conservative politicians have argued that the Olympics have been hijacked by leftists to promote a socialist and anti-Christian agenda. They're partially correct. The reality is that though these have clearly been put forward as part of the agenda of the Olympics, it's not true that the Olympics have really been hijacked. This is what they always have been. And tonight we want to look at the Olympics from a Christian perspective. A lot of people realize that the Olympics have a very old history. What they don't often realize is that there were no Olympics for 1,500 years. The reason for that is that in the year 394, the Christian emperor of the Roman Empire in the West, Theodosius, puts an end to the Olympic Games. He understood that they were dedicated to Zeus, that they were filled with pageantry of pagan worship, and that the Olympics were more of a religious celebration with sports added on to them than they were a celebration of sports per se. There were no Olympics for 1,500 years until a Freemason reestablished them in 1896. With the help of others. He was very forthright about the religious nature of this refounding of the Olympics. His name was Pierre Frédé. He was the Baron de Coubertin. My French is a little rusty. But he stated very forthrightly, he said, the first essential characteristic of the Olympics, both ancient as well as modern, is to be a religion. It represents above and outside the churches humanity's superior religion. It was understood from the very beginning that what he was setting forth was something better than Christianity, something that was at odds with Christianity. It was the reestablishment of paganism. Now, paganism has been with us all through the centuries, but this is a formal establishment of the celebration of paganism. And I think it's no surprise when you hear a host of officials. I didn't bother to get the videos that we could have for this show, but you go down the list of all the various people, whether it's the organizers or whether it's the politicians. They speak of the Olympics in messianic terms. They believe that the Olympics are going to bring about world peace, all kinds of wonderful things, and that this is going to bring true brotherhood of man. And it implicitly is through the rejection of Christianity. What I want to show you this evening is that these Olympic tendencies to promote socialism, where the state is God, and sexual immorality lie at the very root of the Olympics. But we're going to do something a little bit unusual. I want to open up the phone lines because this is going to be sort of a wide-ranging discussion this evening. If you'd like to join in the conversation, the phone number here is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. So let's look at what was being put forward. They were celebrating the national health system in England, Great Britain. This is a system that just last month, it was pointed out by Professor Patrick Pulicino, who is a consultant within the system. He addressed a gathering of physicians and expressed his horror at the fact that 130,000 people every year are basically killed because they're a nuisance in the national healthcare system in Great Britain. They are put on a pathway to death where they are restricted food and water and generally die within 39 hours on average. Many of the people that are put on this pathway to death are done so when they could be cured. But because they need the bed space, or because they're difficult to deal with because of maybe emotional issues or senility or things like this, they just basically let them die. There has been a devaluing of human life and the abandonment of the Christian view of care. We're already slaughtering our children in abortion. Now we're basically euthanizing, whether willingly or unwillingly, the aged and the affirmed. This is a pagan view. We're going to see that. It goes right back to the Greek view of humanity. In the Greek view, the state was everything because man had no rights to property. He had no rights given him by God. The state owned the individual and the property, and everything was to be done for the common good. And basically the voice of the dictator, the tyrant, was the voice of God. When we see the Olympics promoting these things in our day, it shouldn't surprise us when we go back and find it's what this mindset has always put forward. In terms of sexual immorality, the Olympic Organizing Committee of our day is very upfront. This showing of a lesbian kiss to a bunch of children who have gathered to watch something that's supposed to be this wonderful event is not something that just slipped through, and NBC did not edit it out. You can see it. It's about it's a little over half a second long in this montage they keep flashing through. They are committed to basically a rejection of the family and of Christian sexual mores. When Greenville and Spartanburg counties, back before the 1996 Olympics, passed resolutions that said that homosexual behavior was inconsistent with community standards, the Olympic Organizing Committee said, well, then we won't let you, we're going to reroute the Olympic torch relay, and we're going to go around you because if you won't play by our rules, we're not going to have the torch go through your area. When Spartanburg County backed off, then they went through that area. They were threatening also to close training facilities and a whole host of other things. Wherever the Olympic torch went in preparation for the 1996 Atlanta Games, they were playing YMCA. Or I guess this was, 98 anyway. They were playing the Village People singing YMCA, and it was played over and over in the Olympics. Why? It is the anthem of the homosexual movement. It is supposed to be suggestive of what takes place at the YMCA. Well, when you go back to the ancient Greek history, this is not something new and novel. This is what took place there. The original Olympics were filled with homoerotic images and behavior. The original Olympics all took place in the nude. They were only men, but they were all naked. They lived in a society that saw homosexual love, it was touted often as superior to the love between a man and a woman. There's been this great outcry because of what Jerry Sandusky did to young boys at Penn State University. But this is exactly what the gymnasium was like in the ancient Greek world. This is exactly what was celebrated as Greek love. It was the expectation that when you would send a young man to study under an older teacher, that he would rape him. It's called pederasty. This is intricately woven into the very fabric of what it means to be an ancient Greek. You had all kinds of sexual immorality. And it goes back to their gods as well. When you look at the Greek gods, they were not models of any kind of morality. They were liars, they were thieves, and they were completely sexually debauched. Zeus would go and seduce or rape young women and young men. This was the god that they worshiped. When they bring back the Olympics into our day, it's not just as a sporting event, it is a renewal of this old paganism. We have a couple of images here where this was the beginning of this is the lighting of the Olympic flame. It takes place this time at the Temple of Hera, the wife of Zeus. And let's take a look at these. I hope we have them handy here. This is the passing of the flame. We have another one that's immediately before this, the lighting of the flame. You have these women dressed as Vestal virgins. You have this very elaborate, very evocative pagan ritual where you have this lighting of the flame. The same flame that was used in the old Olympics was renewed by the Nazis in 1936 as part of their celebration of the Olympics. But it is a religious spectacle, and it is founded on paganism. The founders admit to that, and it should be no surprise when we see them celebrating the national health care system, a lesbian kiss, and an 11-year-old boy. It's a clip from the movie Billy Elliot, where his friend is another 11-year-old boy is a cross-dresser. This is what they celebrate because it's a different worldview. It's a different religion. We invite you to call in and discuss these matters. The phone number here is 801-973-8820. The phone number 801-973-8820. What we've seen take place is not just a leftist takeover of the Olympics, it is the reason the Olympics exist in the first place. 394 AD, the Emperor Theodosius puts an end to it. And there are no more Olympics for over 1,500 years. Why? Because Christianity was ascended in the West. But as people began yearning for some kind of substitute for Christianity, they go back to this idealized version of what the Greek world was like. You go back to the Greek world and you find that in spite of some amazing accomplishments in terms of conquest and technology and a number of other things, they were a debauched society. There's a reason that they did not survive and that Greece became overwhelmed by Christianity. The reason for that is pretty simple. Their gods were debauched. So how do you have any kind of structure in society when the gods you worship are no real gods at all? These aren't gods who create all things from nothing. They are supermen. They are the descendants of other gods. And they can hurl thunderbolts, they can create storms on the sea, but they are not God. And they are not good. They are capricious and If they like you, that's good. If they don't like you, they'll destroy you, unless you can get the favor of some other god to protect you. And you get gods warring against each other. It's a foolish, ridiculous system. When the Apostle Paul, in Acts 17, goes to Athens, the philosophical, the spiritual center of the Greek world, when he sees the city given over to idolatry, he weeps. He doesn't see this as some wonderful expression of the triumph of humanity. He sees it for what it is. He sees a society that has been debauched through worshiping debauched gods. They don't know the real God. They think they know God, but their God is a fiction. It's a product of man's imagination. How do you have marriage when the chief of your gods is not faithful to his wife? When he abandons his first wife and then marries another wife and then is not faithful to her and is out cavorting with girls and boys? How do you have that? Aristides was one of the 2nd century Christian apologists. Wrote a wonderful little piece defending Christianity against one of the slanders that the pagans had against Christians, which was they said that we were atheists because we didn't worship an idol like they did. They said that we had no God, we're atheists. They said, no, we're not the atheist, you are. Our God is a real God. Our God is not a piece of clay or some 18-foot statue in a temple somewhere. Our God is the one whom the heavens of heavens can't contain. When you look at what was promoted in those ancient societies, I think it fits very well with what you see in the modern expression of the Olympics. Plato, the greatest of the Greek writers, philosophers, he writes The Republic. Many people have heard of it. Very few people have ever read it, it seems, at least not in America in the 21st century. Plato's Republic is fairly straightforward. It advocates a state where the possessions are limited so that there is not a temptation for other countries or other city-states to come in and try to take what they have, and yet where they are so militaristic that they can easily repulse anyone who would come against them. To promote the power of the state, Plato's very clear. You have to destroy the family. You have to, in his society, his ideal was that everyone would have sex with everyone else. And one of the lines is that no father may know his son and no son his father. Because he understood that the ties of family are superior to those of the state. And for the state to be supreme, you have to destroy the family. So he openly advocates for this. Now, at the same time, Plato shows a eugenics streak. Though he didn't have Darwin and Mendelian genetics, he did understand that there were people who produced better offspring than others. And so he advocated that through some manipulation, that those men who were more fit for society would be able to more readily procreate than those who were unfit, and that you could weed out those who were unfit from society. Because the state is God. When your God is out raping young girls and boys, what do you have holding everything together? Well, it's the state. Plato's Republic, he understands that property is also a barrier to the state, personal property. When you have property, there's a tendency to want to preserve, to know who your children are, so that you can pass on property and things like this as well. So there is no private ownership of property. The state owns you and everything. The state, it's in the state that you live and move and have your being. That's the teaching of Plato's Republic. And is it any surprise that the national health system is the focus of this celebration in the Olympics? No. It doesn't matter that people can't get basic health service. It doesn't matter that 130,000 people every year are being basically allowed to die, who are curable. The state decides who gets what resources. The state is God. Just as it was in the Greek, so it is in the minds of the people who formed the Olympics in the first place and who run it today. This isn't a hijacking of the Olympics. It is of its very nature. Phone number again, 801-973-8820. So let's look at how these philosophies come together. We have people who detested Christianity, who wanted to bring back the Olympics of old, drenched in its paganism, drenched in its homosexual behavior, drenched in its statism and everything else. I don't think it's any surprise that we see that they're celebrating homosexuality, and the homosexuals are supportive of them. An article was done 25 years ago now called the Gay Manifesto by Michael Swift. The guy was purposely trying to be provocative. And people have said, well, it was just meant as humor. The funny thing is, we hear these exact things being put forward seriously. Yes, he's saying it in an over-the-top fashion, but did he not mean it? I think that history has shown that he did, and that many others mean the same things. The homosexual movement in this country is not any longer concerned about simply being allowed to live and let live. There is a pushing for the states to recognize homosexual marriage, for homosexuals to have the right to adopt children just as much as anyone else. The state is to recognize them as exactly the same as a married couple under the traditional biblical understanding. In this past week, Dan Cathy, the president of Chick-fil-A, was being interviewed and was asked about his view on marriage. He said, yes, we support traditional marriage, the biblical definition of marriage. In another interview, he said that he thought that this country was inviting the judgment of God when we shake our fist and say, we know better what marriage is than God does. He did not call for anything else. He simply stated his personal views. A Christian businessman who has kept his businesses closed on Sundays for their entire history to observe the Lord's Day. You would have thought that he was pinching the heads off babies, at least in the previous generation, that today that's considered a virtue. But we've had the mayor of Boston, the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of San Francisco all say that they will not allow them to do business. Why? In their communities. Why? Because they dare to say, we believe that God defines marriage. What is the ideal to which they're pushing? Let's listen to the Gay Manifesto. These are a few excerpts from it. I don't have time to read the whole thing this evening. But here's the Gay Manifesto. We shall sodomize your sons, emblems of your feeble masculinity, of your shallow dreams and vulgar lies. We shall seduce them in your schools, in your dormitories, in your gymnasiums, in your locker rooms, in your sports arenas, in your seminaries, in your youth groups, in your movie theater bathrooms, in your army bunkhouses, in your truck stops, in your all-male clubs, in your houses of Congress, wherever men are with men together. Your sons shall become our minions and do our bidding. They will be recast in our image. They will come to crave and adore us. And then this is hearkening to the Olympics and the old paganism. We shall raise vast private armies as Mishima did to defeat you. We shall conquer the world because warriors inspired by and banded together by homosexual love and honor are invincible, as were the ancient Greek soldiers. All churches who condemn us will be closed. Our only gods, are handsome young men. We adhere to a cult of beauty, moral and aesthetic. All that is ugly and vulgar and banal shall be annihilated. Since we are alienated from middle-class heterosexual conventions, we are free to live our lives according to the dictates of pure imagination. For us, too much is not enough. The exquisite society to emerge will be governed by an elite comprised of gay poets. One of the major requirements for a position of power in the new society of homoeroticism will be indulgence in the Greek passion. Any man contaminated with heterosexual lust will be automatically barred from a position of influence. All males who insist on remaining stupidly heterosexual will be tried in homosexual courts of justice and will become invisible men. And then it concludes, tremble, hetero swine, when we appear before you without our mask. People have objected that I've read this in the past, and they say, well, that's just not really serious, isn't it? The pastor of one of our congregations in San Francisco opposed gay civil unions, the equating of marriage of two men with the marriage of a man and a woman 30 years ago. As a consequence, we had our church firebombed with the pastor and his family in the adjacent manse. It was actually the manse that was the focus. It's one building where the pastor's home was adjacent to the chapel. There has been a battle between paganism and Christianity through all of history. I believe that the Olympics were not hijacked. I believe that they were, from their founding, from the expressed desires of their founder, meant to be a replacement for Christianity. The gushing descriptions that we hear from politicians, it is because they see the state as messianic and they see this as a vehicle to that. If you'd like to join in the conversation, the phone number here, 801-973-8820. We're talking about the Olympics. We're talking about its connections with statism and sexual immorality. To me, I think it's very straightforward. When they had the Olympics, I believe it was in Atlanta, they darkened the entire stadium to symbolize, and you have a narrator telling this, to symbolize 1,500 years of darkness. In other words, when Christianity reigned. But then, after the darkness, the light came back. It's a revival of paganism. And I invite you to join in the conversation. What does the Bible say about these things? We had a caller last week who took issue that we need to accept that there are people who are homosexual and just endorse that because there's nothing to do to stop it. Christianity turned the world upside down. Christianity told people there's a God. And sex is a gift of that God, and it's not to be enjoyed in adultery, it's not to be enjoyed in incest, it's not to be enjoyed with animals, and it's not to be enjoyed with people of the same sex. It's to be enjoyed within marriage. All through the Bible we see it condemned. We see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, not because of simple inhospitality and neglect of the poor. People love to read the first part of that passage in Ezekiel, but they don't read the next part where it says that they committed an abomination before God. To'avah, the same term that's used in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 to describe homosexual behavior. It is an abomination. It is condemned with the death penalty under the civil laws of Israel. Does that mean that we're being commanded to do the same thing today? No. But it was on the basis of this, realizing that there is no neutrality for the state. The state's either going to embrace one religion or another, fundamentally. Not necessarily a denomination, but there's going to be some basis of truth. Either you're going to recognize that marriage is solely between a man and a woman, or you're going to throw it open to where it's between a man and a woman and a woman, or a whole bunch of people, or people and animals, and people or things, or whatever. I mean, basically, you've just done away with marriage. You've not broadened it, you've destroyed the whole definition of it. There were laws on the books until our Supreme Court, in their infinite wisdom, discovered a right that none of our founding fathers ever seemed to have anticipated that they were creating. But over 200 years after the Constitution was approved, they discovered that there's a right to sodomy, and that all the state laws against sodomy had to be wiped out. States could no longer make any law to differentiate between sex between anybody. We've not had the rejection of religion in this country. We've had the replacement of one religion with another. And that's the point I'm trying to make here this evening. We're going to go to our first call. We have with us Ray from Provo. Ray, good to have you with us.
I just want to hear your quick comments on in vitro fertilization.
Well, it's a
Do
bit
you have any ideas on that whole procedure, in vitro fertilization?
It's a bit off the subject, but just off the cuff, depends on how it's done. If you're creating children to throw them away, then it's ungodly. If you're making use of technology to try to help you have children that would be difficult or impossible otherwise, it's a different matter. But most in vitro fertilization, of which I'm aware, there's creation of fertilized eggs, where the only thing that separates us from a fertilized egg is time and nutrition. And they are either, well, generally they're flushed. And I think that's just the same as an abortion. When you're creating a unique individual, they have all the DNA. All they need is time and nutrition to become a full-grown human being. If you create that with the purpose of destroying it, you're playing God. If, on the other hand, you're using technology to help you conceive, and it's not involving destruction, my off-the-cuff answer is I don't see a problem there. Does that help?
So, in other words, you're saying that there are conditions.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, in just about everything. If you're trying to get your wife to the hospital, if your wife is having some kind of medical emergency, it's legitimate to drive faster than you normally would, but it's not okay to run over other people. It's not, there are conditions in just about every behavior that you pursue. In vitro fertilization, I think that it's something that we need to be very careful that we're not playing God. If someone has some kind of, I mean, I may be showing my lack of knowledge of the technology. If you are having difficulty with an egg being fertilized under normal circumstances, and you're trying to help that process along, so long as you're not killing babies in the process, I don't see a huge problem with that. We need to be careful that we don't go, that we weigh these technologies, because who is it that opens and closes the womb? It's God. But if there's a...
that gay people would be using in vitro fertilization in the future quite a bit.
Well, I'm talking about in vitro fertilization simply within the terms of marriage. In terms of homosexuals, what they are doing is called by God an abomination. Now, I've talked about this before. Be clear, I deserve hell more than anyone I know. Homosexual behavior is something that is a sin, but it is forgivable. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6, don't be deceived, the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God. And he goes through a number of different groups, including both the active and passive terms for homosexual behavior, adulterers, thieves, covetous, etc. And he says, and such were some of you. To bring a child into a home that is an abomination to God, to me is the ultimate selfishness. I think it's it is one thing. It's bad enough to engage in a behavior that God calls an abomination, that under the civil law of Israel that then existed was the death penalty, that is described in Romans 1 as a judgment of God. It's bad enough to engage in all that yourself, but then to try to bring children into that and subject them to it. To do like this foolish mother over in Colorado, where, what is it, an 11-year-old boy that she's got him dressing like a girl. It's not just some, foolish desire on his part. It's being imposed by his mother, and they've put him into the Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scouts have accepted him. It's perverse. It is the shaking of your fist at God and saying, we know better. So, whether homosexuals bring children in by adoption or by normal means or in vitro fertilization, to me it doesn't really much matter. It's the same result. But I hope that helps.
Cloning.
Cloning?
Cloning.
Cloning?
Cloning, yes, cloning.
Cloning is, cloning in every possible technology that I see on the horizon is the destruction of a human life in favor of another. You have to have a fertilized egg from which you extract the DNA of the new person and stick in someone else's DNA and try to grow them. That hasn't worked real well, but in terms of cloning, once again, you're killing a child. You're creating a child through the fertilization of an egg. Given time and nutrition, that child becomes us. There's absolutely nothing else in between. God says, thou shalt not kill. All these things seem to be pursued by folks who have a strong desire to create some brave new world. I don't think it's surprising that many of the people who are espousing these things are openly hostile to the family, to private property, and to everything else. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Do you believe in the death penalty?
Yes.
Okay.
Bible. A lot of subjects, they do sort of tie into what we're talking about this evening because the question is, do we follow the Word of God? Noah is told after the flood, he says, our God tells him, if man sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. And it's very straightforward. We see the death penalty in the civil laws, and we see that we're told in Romans 13 that the state does not bear the sword in vain. So before the giving of any law to Israel, the universal law given to Noah, if you shed man's blood, by man your blood shall be shed, because in the image of God created he man. When you assault another person, you're assaulting God, because he's bearing God's image. And so, yes, the death penalty is still there. Is there still the death penalty for adultery and homosexual behavior? No. Those were not things that were specified before the giving of the law at Sinai. That has ended with the coming of Christ. Does the state now say, well, what God said was an abomination and brought the death penalty before, we're just going to ignore altogether? No. Through most of our history, because we had some semblance of a Christian understanding of the world, there were not only civil penalties, but criminal penalties against adultery and against homosexual behavior. I mean, we had laws on the books up until, 9 years ago, when the Supreme Court all of a sudden discovered the right to sodomy, just like they discovered the right to an abortion. Most people don't seem to understand that the Constitution never grants these rights. It's judges sitting back saying, well, some judges before us seem to think that there was some reason to think that there's a right to privacy, even though it doesn't say so anywhere in there. And if there's a right to privacy, then follow from that, we're going to create the right to an abortion. And if we have the right to an abortion, then we have the right to do this too, and we have that right and this right. And yet what's funny is we don't have the right to a whole host of other things that are enumerated there. But at any rate, what do we make of this pagan resurgence? It's an old battle. It's the same battle that Christianity's been fighting for a long time. We won it before, and we can win it again. Paganism is bankrupt. It always has been. You can put stirring music, you can get John Williams and others to do all kinds of rousing fanfares. You can do all kinds of wonderful displays. You can use all kinds of choreographers and various special effects technicians to create a true spectacle. But what does the Olympics actually put forward? It puts forward failed views of the world. They don't have a God that's God. They haven't been able to bring world peace. They haven't been able to bring all the things that they thought they could bring. The 20th century was actually the most violent and vicious in human history, at least in terms of scope. And they really don't have hardcore answers other than just trust us, give all your property, your family, and everything else to the state, and we'll somehow save you. Well, let's go to our next call. We have with us Stephanie from Layton. Stephanie, good to have you with us. Stephanie?
Hello?
You're on the air. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I just have a question. What if you have a child who is homosexual and has seemed to have been that way since birth? What's your opinion on that?
Okay. I think that all of us have predispositions to various forms of sin. There are some children who come into this world more aggressive, more rebellious. There are some children who come into this world in a host of different ways. There are some children for whom Being a bully would never be a temptation. There are some children for whom being homosexual would never be a temptation. The reality is that homosexual behavior overwhelmingly comes from a weak or absent father. That's not always the case, but often a very strong mother figure. And I have 6 children. They have 6 radically different personalities. I think we need to recognize that homosexual behavior is just a sin. It is a sin like, we have this twisted view that if our son is out having sex with a host of girls, that somehow that's better than if he's having sex with boys. Both of them are sin. Both of them are completely inconsistent with Christianity and a changed heart. We need to point our children away from whatever sin that they are tempted to. We need to help them to understand those temptations. We need to help them understand that temptation is not sin, that it is acting on those temptations. It is being an adulterer, being a thief, being a liar, being a homosexual in behavior. These are the things that are clear rebellion against God. A lot of boys, they are quiet, they are sensitive, they end up getting bullied. And because they're awkward, because of a host of various things, because people are out there looking for to recruit people, or we actually have teachers now suggesting maybe you're gay. There are people who go that way instead of recognizing that being tempted to something that's wrong is not to be given into. God can change our hearts. I have friends who were practicing homosexuals, and the Lord changed their hearts. And there are some people for whom that change never really comes over to where they think they're really equipped to be in another relationship with someone of the opposite sex, because they've just got so much confusion in their head. But they recognize that that's the effects of sin around them. Some of them have been molested, some of them have been other things. So anyway, I hope that helps. Just because our children are tempted or bent a certain way doesn't mean that that's somehow something that we should embrace or encourage. If our children are tempted to lie, don't encourage that. Don't say, well, God made you that way and God doesn't make junk. If your child is tempted to go out and be promiscuous with the opposite sex, do we say, well, God just made you that way? If we see a sadistic streak in a child, do we say, well, God made you that way and God doesn't make junk? No. We say, we're all sinners. We're all born into this world with a bad heart and a bad record. And we need that heart changed and we need that record cleansed. And Jesus Christ can do that and will do that. There are a lot of different variables. Not every situation is the same, but I think that it's important to recognize that a lot of times there are factors that were controllable. Sometimes our children are bent the way they are because they have been molested, or because they've been they haven't had a proper relationship with their father. It's not a stereotype. There's a lot of reality that many lesbians hate men. because of bad relationships with their father or with someone else. A lot of homosexual men, they don't know how to relate. And there are ways to deal with that. If you have specific questions, I'm answering in the abstract here. I'd be happy to answer any of those questions off air that I can. But I've seen people changed, and that's anathema to the homosexual crowd, because they don't want to admit that anyone has any choice in the matter. The funny thing is, we have seen our culture, you know, the argument that we're either gay or straight is falling apart in this world where it's clear that people are just seeking after sensual pleasure, where they're enjoying sexual pleasure with people of both sexes indiscriminately. I don't know if you've heard, we've actually crossed the threshold in this country. In 1960, the illegitimacy rate in this country was a little over 5%, 5 and a fraction. I think it's 5.7 or something like that. It was under 6%. Last year, of all the babies born in this country, not just inner city, not just one coast or the other, every baby born in this country to women between the ages of 20 and 30, over half of them were illegitimate. Over half. Children born in a family are now the exception to the rule because we've abandoned Christianity as a nation. And people look at children who are tempted in various ways and they just, well, everybody's doing it now. Do we really care so little about our children that we just tell them, well, I wish you wouldn't, but Christianity has defeated paganism over and over. If it does not in this country, then paganism will destroy us, just like it's destroyed every other culture that it's ever been part of. If our gods are no more than sex-crazed men, if our real power is the state, where the state is our purpose for everything, it's in the state that we live and move and have our being, God will show us just what fools we are. Paul says to the Corinthians, the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God. And he names homosexuals and thieves, which is another name for socialism. He says, and such were some of you, but you've been washed, but you've been sanctified, but you've been justified in the name of Jesus Christ. There is freedom and there is forgiveness. And these are not just political matters, they are matters of religion. What is being put forward is not the absence of religion, it is very, very old religion. Goes back to Greece, goes back to Eden, where Satan says, hath God said? Has God really said not to do this? Don't you really know better than what God has said? Don't you know that there's so much more than what God's willing to give you? Take and eat of the fruit. God has declared everything very good, but it's not good. It's not good at all. God is either incapable or unwilling to give you true goodness. True goodness is to be found in doing what's right in your eyes. That's the Olympics. It's the same empty promises, and it's the same slavery. Well, If you would like more information on our congregation, it's Christ Presbyterian Church. We're a congregation of the Orthodox Presbyterian denomination. We meet Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. We have a sister congregation, well, we meet at 8630 West, 2700 South. That's Main Street, Magna. We have a sister congregation, Berean Presbyterian Church, meets at 3350 Harrison Boulevard at 9 a.m. in Ogden. We are a congregation that holds to another very old faith, because it doesn't change because God doesn't change. We believe that the Bible is the Word of God, and we believe that men who think they know better than God are fools, and they show themselves over and over through human history, and will show themselves again. We don't believe we're wiser than God. We believe that we're to shut up and listen to Him. The funny thing is, that brings greater freedom and greater humanity than anything the states can bring. Do we really want to be like China? Like these athletes who don't even know their parents and their grandparents because they're owned by the state, and the state can do anything they want to them, where there is no private ownership of property. Or do we want to go back to 1,500 years of blessing? It's never been perfect, but those who promise heaven on earth are liars. There's only one heaven, and it's through Jesus Christ. Well, we invite you to join us next time. And until then, we wish you the Lord's greatest blessings. Good night.